Thank you, everybody, for attending this morning's congregational meeting. There is a clipboard going around for you to sign in. If you haven't had a chance to do that and it's already passed you, just please raise your hand and we'll make sure you are able to sign in. I would like to call today's meeting to order. We're very excited about this important meeting. We have 3 different votes that we're going to take today, 2 that will be balloted. I really appreciate your attendance this morning. So we will start out with a prayer of invocation by Pastor Allie.
Would you join me in prayer? Dear God, we thank you for everyone gathered here now. Thank you that you know each one of us by name and have caused us to walk with you. We say that we are dependent on you and our trust is in you completely. As we surrender ourselves in adoration, we ask that you would come by your Holy Spirit and inspire our hearts today. Come fill our lives with your love. Fill our conversations this morning with your grace and truth. Fill this meeting with your presence. We ask this for your glory and praise. Amen.
And now I will invite Kelly Loomis to come up here, if Kelly is here. There she is.
Hello, my name is Kelly Loomis, and I am the convener of the nominating committee. And on behalf of the OCC nominating committee, I submit the 2023-2024 committee assignments to be voted upon. If you look on the backside of the agenda, you will see the recommended committee members and leadership. I respectfully submit this nominating document to be voted upon by the OCC congregation.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to everyone who has graciously volunteered their time to be considered for membership and leadership of these committees. So do we have a motion to approve the suggested committee membership and leadership? Scott, your motion. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor of this list for our next leadership? Say amen. Amen. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Ooh, yay. That was the easy one. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it wasn't easy. The nominating committee worked very hard, so thank you. So our next item that we have for discussion is our Okemos Community Church Constitution. So over the last few weeks, we have sent several communications out informing you that the cabinet has spent a good bulk of the year, at least of the calendar year, revising our Constitution to be more current. I sincerely thank those of you who have read through it, who have brought forward questions, who have had engaged in meaningful discussion about this. We felt that our Constitution was not really in keeping with how we were operating as a church, so we wanted to update some of the language and some of the specifics about committee membership and things like that. And with that, I would like to open the Constitution up for discussion. So if you have a discussion, I see we have a microphone there. So if you have any points or questions that you would like to raise, I invite you to either step up to the podium or raise your hand. And if you cannot come to the podium, we will get the microphone to you. Yes, Matt.
I want to thank the Cabinet for the work they've done on the Constitution. I think it's an excellent job. I do have a point of concern with the Constitution. I would support adopting the Constitution as is now, but it needs some additional, I believe it needs some additional work. The Constitution is for Okemos Community Church, and Okemos Community Church is an independent church. Yet there is, in the Constitution itself, rather than just saying we are affiliated church with the United Methodist Church, and the details of that affiliation agreement are incorporated in the Constitution by reference, there are continuing references in the Constitution itself about, for example, the West Michigan chapter, or people being lay members of the conference, or shares, I can't really think of the right word that we're saying, our payments to, all of those things are appropriate, but they need to be in the affiliation agreement. The Constitution for Okemos Community Church needs to be about Okemos Community Church only. And now, that's not to be read as I'm saying anything about the affiliation agreement with the United Methodist, because I'm on the board of trustees on the conference, so that's a whole other argument. But a distinction without a difference is a problem, and we put too much. We are independent, but we're affiliated, and this document as it's written doesn't accomplish that goal completely. And what I would suggest is we adopt this Constitution as is now, but also request that the Cabinet further work on that and come back in December or the next opportunity to consider cleaning that up further. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And I would like to say that we are very grateful for everyone's voice, and I want to make sure that we encourage anybody who has a thought or opinion to raise that voice. And we might not all agree, but we are a church of a lot of variety and a lot of diverse backgrounds in Christianity, and even our affiliation in our own personal history with the Methodist Church. And I appreciate your point of view on that. Allie, would you like to address that? Thank you.
I appreciate you bringing that up as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion about United Methodist Church in the world right now and in the news, and we get that asked. I mean, we had a funeral here yesterday, and people are like, is this the United Methodist Church? So if you turn to page 2 of the proposed Constitution, Article 1, Church Name and Mission. So I'll give you a second to get there. Number 1, the name of this church shall be Okemos Community Church. Nothing changed there. Number 2, Okemos Community Church is an interdenominational church. Semicolon. There's the statement right there. It is an interdenominational church. It does not claim to be United Methodist Church, but it said it is affiliated with the United Methodist Church and reaches out to people of diverse religious backgrounds. And then it makes reference to the affiliation agreement. So I'm not sure that we can actually change that affiliation agreement because it's a historical document, and the Constitution has always spoke to the historical nature of how this how we've come to be affiliated with the United Methodist Church. And I believe it says on page 3 under the historic agreement, so Article 2, historic agreement. So again, the Constitution is just giving a historical outline, of what happened. And then number 2, the current affiliation does say, see this attached addendum. And if that's something people want to look at, we can put that in the newsletter, we can make copies. But basically, it's just an agreement that continues into perpetuity. So if you went to law school, that's one of the first words that you learned was in perpetuity. But don't be scared by that, because either party is able to end the affiliation with proper notice. So it's not something that we're locked into. Has nothing to do with disaffiliation that's happening with the United Methodist Church, because as Article 1 states, we are an interdenominational church only with an affiliation. So I can see how there can be some confusion, and sometimes we're kind of loose with our language, and it kind of makes it sound, maybe we say that there's more or less of an affiliation, but that is what it is, and it's historical. So I would just proffer that in part of our conversations as to the history and what I think the intent is behind in adding that language. Thank you.
Thanks, Ally, for that point of view. And I would ask if anybody else has any comments or questions. I think Pastor Ally does.
Pastor Otis, I wanted to address where you talked about West Michigan Conference. So again, before I even arrived here, there was a time in history when the United Methodist Church here in Michigan had two conferences. And then at some point, those became the Michigan Conference. So what was updated into the Constitution was to reflect that we don't have an affiliation with the West Conference. We now have an affiliation. So to clarify that language, because that simply doesn't exist anymore. So that's the reason why that was updated.
Thanks for making that distinction. Yes, so the language that Matt was concerned about, that was language that was in the Constitution. Matt has raised his concern that, you know, maybe we should consider removing that from the Constitution. And I thank you for that point of view, and I thank you, Ally, for yours. Other questions or comments before I ask for a motion for a vote? Okay, well then, that went a little smoother than I thought, at least this part. So do we have a motion to adopt the Constitution as revised and proposed to the congregation? Matt, you motion? Do we have a second? You second, Daisy? All right. We will take this vote by ballot. So you were handed 2 ballots when you came in. If you don't have a ballot, raise your hand. We'll make sure you get your ballots. So at this time, we will be asking you to vote on the Constitution, and those ballots will be collected, I believe, by Beth. Is Beth here? Yes. Or who? How? Wonderful. Marcy, Joellen, and Pat. So if you want to vote and fold your ballot and pass it, whichever way they are coming. So it looks like they're coming down the aisle, any of the aisles, maybe. And now, as the votes are being tallied, we will have Lee McAllister give his renovation report and his report from the Finance Committee.
Good morning. Well, this morning I have some very good news and some bad news. First, the bad news. As of May 31st, our operating deficit was nearly $25,000. Our expenses have been more than our revenues so far this year. But there were some unusual expenses going on, and I'll talk about. But the good news is that a very generous member knew of our situation and donated an additional $20,000 to help offset most of that deficit. So that reduces it down to less than $5,000 at this point. Much more manageable. So thank you. Now this person wishes to be anonymous, which would be different than it would be me, although I am a very humble person, as you know. So what's happened so far this year? Overall, most of our budget expenses are in good shape. However, utilities and maintenance expenses are about $16,000 over budget for the year. Some of this is simply the cost of heating, this building and keeping the lights on. We've all experienced this in our own homes. We used to pay our utilities by credit card to earn cash back, a little extra money for us. Consumers Energy eliminated that program this year, and that moved our due dates up. So this year we're going to be paying 13 for 13 months, and then we'll get back into the 12-month cycle next year. But we had to play catch up this year. That was about a $3,500 hit. So that's part of this deficit that we've got for the current year. Now, if you remember last year, we had I'll call it a debacle, regarding our internet address. We had to change that address, and a number of bills, which we're used to receiving it via email, didn't get to us until this year. That amounted to about $7,000 in 2022 expenses being paid this year. So once again, we thought we'd have it, kind of free and clear, but no, there was some issues regarding that. So another aspect of our increased maintenance is the fact our previous renovation is now 14 years old. Things are breaking down and wearing out. We've never seemed to have an excess in our general operating budget to set aside enough to plan ahead for all these expenses, but now it's becoming of greater concern. This is our church home, and just like our individual homes, it continually needs repairs. So we'll have to address that issue. We've been taking some corrective actions. First of all, our snow plowing budget is $10,000 per year. Always amazes me. Even though we had a relatively mild winter, we still needed to plow our parking lot and salt the sidewalks, whether it's 2 inches or 6 inches. Each time we did this, it's an $1,100 bill. Of course, we're open most days of the week, including evenings, so it's not just a Saturday evening having them come in. It's continual through the week if we get snow. We've now found a new contractor who will charge us less and under better terms as to when they will come out. So we hope to be saving some money in the future there. Mark Brunner and Scott Hardy have been changing out our lighting fixtures from fluorescent to LED in order to save energy. Our non-essential monitors around the church have been turned off during the week. Now you might think that's an easy task, click, click. But no, it involves programming because everything we have is connected together. So you have to change the programs in order to do that. So these are small items, but they do add up. In addition, we'll tackle other items brought up during the financial task force meeting earlier this year. And that should result in further savings as we go on. So we thought we would make further progress on the remaining $5,000 deficit during June, after that $20,000 donation. However, our receipts for June have entered that summer slump, I like to call it. Luckily, our expenses are normally lower than too, but you might ask, how could I help? I'm glad you asked. First of all, if you're in a position to give more than what you pledged, this would be a good time to do so. We'd like to get back to that time when we had a surplus carryover at the end of the year. I do remember that. Secondly, if you're in the habit of paying in a lump sum during the second half of the year, perhaps you could advance that to calm the nerves of those on the Finance Committee. Thirdly, if you only remember to give when you attend, please consider the options you have for paying electronically. You can go to our Church Center app or our website, okemoschurch.org. Our newsletter includes a direct link to our QR code where you can pay by credit card or debit card. We have options for you to pay. And finally, if you're in a position to do so, please give more than you pledged this year. Oh, I already said that, didn't I? But it bears repeating. If we all give a little more, that deficit will be behind us. So more good news. We have the money to pay our bills because we have a number of people who pay in advance for the whole year. I've said that before, that Marcy allocates 1/12 of that money each month into our revenue stream to match our expenses. We don't want to include it all at the beginning of the year as income and then overspend accordingly and then get surprised at the end of the year when we find the shortfall. So we manage our money prudently. So at this point, do you have any questions about the finance? None? Okay. I just have one more comment about the renovation. Really, you'd think after a year we would be behind us, but we still have, just learned today from Jonathan, one more outstanding bill. We'd already set aside the monies for that, so we're finally wrapping up some of these things. And then there was another small project in the kitchen that has to be done that, we had an inspection afterwards, like, well, where's the backflow on this? Well, we didn't, that was not part of the plan. Well, you need another backflow, so we'll have an additional bill like that. But we're going to have about a $20,000 surplus left over in those monies. So we manage that well, and we'll continue to manage all of our monies well. So thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And Lee, I know you don't get enough paintings hung in your name around here. You don't get enough recognition, right? I just want to thank you for your service as chair of the Finance Committee, and we welcome Daisy taking over that committee. We're very happy to have you as well. And I'm looking forward to your non-anonymous gift that we will announce in church in the coming weeks. And I will announce mine at that time as well. So we have the results of the vote for adoption of the Constitution. I am happy to report that there were 48 yes votes, 2 no votes, so that resolution passes. So thank you again for the cabinet for your hard work on that. So next we are going to hear from Matt. The program says Deb was not able to be here today, and Matt has graciously offered to speak on her behalf.
Good morning. The Board of Trustees we work closely with the finance committee, and Lee comes to all of our meetings, even though he's not formally part of all the activities, but he tells us, we don't have any money, don't worry about that. So just keep going from there. I'm here to talk about a technical change that has real meaning to the Board of Trustees. As you may be aware, the Board of Trustees is the fiduciary body for the church. We're responsible for all funding within the church. Not the operational, but once the funding's through, we don't run the operational budget, but we're the fiduciary responsibility. Deb Federow signs all the contracts, just to give you an example, for activities that go on within the church, because she's the chair of the trustees. One of the funds that we have under our authority in the trustees is commonly known as the Parsonage Fund. And that was created back in 2003 when we sold the parsonage that was located actually on Belding Court, about 4 houses down from where I live right now. And that money was, we converted from a parsonage operation to one where we pay a housing allowance to the pastors. And that is becoming more and more the standard within the United Methodist Church. Unless you happen to live in a little teeny town where you can't really buy and sell a house easily, then that's a good place for a parsonage to stay. But in places like Okemos and everywhere else, it's a much bigger benefit to a pastor for them to be able to have a housing allowance. And they can buy a house like Pastor Dylan just did, or like Pastor Gene did in the past, or Pastor Rick, and build more roots that way. Well, the United Methodist Conference also, about 5 years ago, recognized that and said, we're going to remove a restriction that Okemos Community Church followed. It says if you sell the parsonage, you had to restrict $100,000 of the sale of that parsonage in case you had to buy a parsonage in the future. That's no longer the requirement within the United Methodist Church. They recognize that the movement towards the housing allowance. So what we're here to ask today is to remove a restriction on funds from $100,000 of the proceeds from the sale of the parsonage. Now, there's a current fund right now that has about $198,000 in it, and that's available. So $98,000 of that fund is available for use for the types of things that the Board of Trustees are involved in. Repairs on boilers, repairs on roofs, those kinds of things. It's not operational budget stuff. It's big things. And I'll tell you a couple of things we are working on right now. But we want to take off the restriction on all the money within that fund. So it's available, that adds to the flexibility that's available to the Board of Trustees. We're no longer going to be in the parsonage business. So this is going to take that restriction off of the funds, and that fund will be available to us to use for the operations, the operational needs of the church, such as, and I should say that wrong, capital needs of the church, not the operational needs. Operation being the salaries and electricity that Allie mentioned, or snow plowing. We're talking about big repairs and big ideas. I'll give you an idea of what some of those things are right now and how we're approaching them. If you've driven up the driveway recently, you see those nice cones that are sitting there. Back in 2009, Lee said, let's save some money and do a cheap, no. They designed a standard cross drive drain. That takes all the water from the parking lot, it all funnels down into that drain, and then goes off through the various channels to the entrance up in the Red Cedar River. But that has failed. And it's an older design, works great, but has a tendency to fail. That's why those cones are standing there. It's not completely gone, but when something fails, I'm an engineer, when it fails, it means it's not doing what it was supposed to do before. Now it's failed. We're redesigning that, and we just took action at the last board meeting to use some of the proceeds, I believe about $15,000 of the proceeds from the $98,000 that the Board of Trustees can tap into out of the parsonage fund to do the design and do the setup. We're going to redo the drainage for the parking lot, and it's going to be on the side. You'll see catch basins on the side, and it'll drain on the side, so people won't be driving over the drain. Keep people off the drain. It doesn't break. It'll drain better. Water will flow better. We won't have ponding. All of those things. That's just one of the examples that we're working on. We have the boiler that we were at the beginning of the year thinking the company that we were working with was telling us, you might be able to squeak another year out of those boilers. And we're talking, $150,000 fix. Not a real fun thing to try to contemplate in times if things are tight everywhere. We've got a new company working with Mark and Larry Judge. They brought a new company in, a two-person operation, looked at it and said, we think we can make this work better. And they've come up with a plan. Cost us about $8,000. We were replacing the air tank it allows, basically you won't have problems in the pipes working, and the boiler, the renovation of the boiler should get another 10 years or so out of those boilers. So from 150 down to 8, we're pretty good. And we paid for that out of the capital fund that we have, the capital improvement fund that's there, or capital maintenance fund that we have. There's about a $10,000 fund. We're spending most of that on that boiler improvement. We're facing challenges on the flat roof over the memorial area and the children's or the Sunday school. Some of the estimates for that, $250,000. And that's to tear it all off and fix it and do it all new again. And it's a flat roof. Michigan, if you're in Michigan, don't build things with flat roofs, but that's kind of what we have. I mean, you remember, we've repaired that roof several times. In my time, we have replaced it. We're looking at alternatives, and looks like we've got a pretty good alternative put in place to do a much less expensive fix that might get us another 5 years. If you come around, you're going to see a drone flying over the church here pretty soon, because we're going to take thermal imaging of that area and spend $800 to take a thermal image and find out where there's water infiltration so we can get in and get that fixed. There's still some unknowns up there, but we're feeling much more confident that it's going to be a small fix for now, and we can continue to move forward. But all of these things are there, and they all, unfortunately, are going to cost us to maintain this beautiful building that we have and that we've invested so heavily in. We're going to have to continue to invest in protecting the building and providing an adequate heating function, providing good roofing, providing a parking lot. All of those things are there. These aren't renovation dollars. We're not talking about doing things differently. We're just talking about maintaining the building in its operational status. And usually things get better when we change it, like when they're changing to LEDs or LCDs from it's a better look. Lighting's better. When we fix the roof, we're going to put a new drain in there. It'll drain better on the roof. We won't have some of the ponding problems that we have up there. Those are the kinds of things that we're doing with the Board of Trustees. So what the ask today is for you simply to remove the restriction on those funds. This is simply a technical ask, but it has real meaning because we will be using some of those funds for the projects that we have forced. Do we expect to use all of them? Certainly not. We've had that fund since 2004. The funds have been available to the Board of Trustees for that time. And the only thing that's been used, of course, it's been earning interest and growing. The roof over the sanctuary was partially funded. The metal roof here was partially funded from proceeds and earnings on that fund. So it's a big ask when you come to the Board of Trustees and want us to dip into that fund. But we also recognize that we need the flexibility to do that. So the request today is for you to approve removing the restriction on the parsonage fund, because we're not going to be in the parsonage business anymore. But we are going to stay in the business of maintaining and securing this building for the future. And that's the request. So, any questions?
I actually have two. Number one, you said that there's, like the fund is growing, there's investment. How is the fund, is it just in a bank and it's just gaining regular interest, or is there investment involved?
In the West Michigan Conference investment fund, and that's about the extent I can tell you. Maybe Marcy can tell you more how that works. Marcy?
It's a fund that was established by the United Methodist Foundation, and it's an investment fund. It's done very well compared to other funds. We average, we said 198, but on the size too, so over these years, it's done well.
Yep.
Okay, and then the other, just point of clarification, the money for the housing allowance for the pastor, I thought that was part of the regular yearly budget. You were saying it was coming out of that fund.
No, I'm sorry. That was not my intent to say that. The housing allowance is part of our operating budget, part of the compensation package provided to the pastors. This fund is not used for that at all. This is and has never been used for that. Mark? Sure.
I just wanted to make, I don't have a problem with taking away the restriction from utilizing it solely for parsonage. That doesn't apply anymore. My concern is this. When you look at the contributions that the church receives, there's three basic types. One is where it's permanently restricted and it goes to the endowment fund. And only the income from that can be spent. That is a permanently restricted asset. The second type of contribution that we receive is that where the church member or outside person donates to the church and says, I want it only used for this specific purpose. And that can range from saying I want it to be used for missions or the food bank or any number of funds. And I think we probably have 20 separate ongoing funds that the church members have said, here's my contribution, but it can only be used for that purpose. And then we have the general unrestricted contributions that we receive. And this would fall in that category. It's a general asset of the church. It's one that internally we replaced a restriction on it as to how it would be used. but those were general assets of the church, giving us full authority as to how to use it. Lee just reported that we have an operating deficit of $25,000, which means that practically we're borrowing from some source, right, in order to be able to pay our bills. If we got $25,000 in the hole, we're borrowing those assets from some source. It's inappropriate, in my view, to borrow from endowment, to borrow from specifically designated funds. So the only source that we can borrow from is the general assets of the church, and this would be one of them. So I think we need to keep in mind that you can't, if we take the restrictions off of this fund, the church can't generally operate the way it has in the past by running a deficit unless there's sufficient general reserve assets out there to do so. So this fund should never be spent below the level of deficit potential we might run in our general operations. So cautionary setting. I think the Board of Trustees and Finance need to coordinate to say, what level of reserves does the church need to maintain at all times? And this would be one of those funds where you need to have a specific target, be that 50,000 or be that 75,000 or whatever it is. So you might remove this restriction for parsonage, but I think you need to place a restriction for practical operations on it. Disappointed.
And I wouldn't disagree. Go, Tom?
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to make one clarification. We were at a $25,000 deficit. We're now at about a $5,000 deficit. So I just wanted to make that clarification in case anybody missed that earlier.
And I also want to say that there's never been any discussion. The restriction on that money in this money that's in the parsonage fund is $100,000. There's been another, as Mark said, it's been as high as $208,000 over time. There's never been a discussion that I've been part of, that I'm aware of using any of those dollars for operations. But the idea of using that as a backstop for the churches, so we're not falling below into a negative total fund balance, is very valid. I understand that. Mr. Lyons. The fund itself, the investment fund, has $198,000 in it. Only $100,000 of that is restricted. Okay, so there's $98,000 that's unrestricted in that fund, and then another $100,000 that's restricted.
So the $98,000 now could be used as a reserve.
It could be. There's no restriction on it at all, other than the restrictions that we have for Board of Trustees. We use that money for larger. Yes.
Just further clarification, Matt. So we talked about using the fund, parsonage fund, for capital expenses, not operational.
Yes.
Is that in writing that it's restricted to capital expenses, capital costs, or is this fund $198,000 eligible for any use?
My understanding is Mark is accurate. It'll become a general asset of the church, but the recognition on the part there. So I do not believe there's anything in writing that says this is what this is. Just like in the budget, we have a capital expenditure line, but there's nothing in writing that says the church will have this, or that's part of the budgetary process or part of the asset balance that's held. It rolls over year to year. This would be similar. I don't, speaking for myself, and I'm pretty sure I could speak to the trustees, I don't think there would be a concern if there was a restriction put on there to say this is for capital purposes, because they're capital expenditures for maintenance, because that's what we intend on using it for. There's many members of the Board of Trustees here, and I'm seeing nods from many of them. That would not be something that we would be concerned about, because that's the intent for using these funds.
Can I
Sure.
speak to that? Great questions, everybody. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you have with this. This fund is currently overseen by the trustees. The trustees do not make general operating budget decisions. It is not the intent of the cabinet to sort of usurp that. And I will read you the motion that was raised in the trustees meeting. And this was raised by Alan Jones. So Alan moved that the congregation approve to remove the parsonage-only restriction on trustees' funds set aside for the sale of the parsonage in 2003. The change will permit the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees does report to the cabinet, but this would be under the Board of Trustees, to use these funds for critical needs and emergencies involving our building and its properties. Now, maybe there's some room for interpretation there, but I think the intent there is this is trustees' funds for the building and our properties.
So are we voting on that? Is that actually, when we cast a vote, yes, we're casting a vote.
Yes, I will read that again when we cast the vote, and I will ask for someone to actually motion that and a second. That's what our intent is, unless somebody raises a different motion. Yeah, go ahead. Back, Rebecca.
For clarification, this money, this $190,000, is not intended to be used in regular operations for the church property, but for special projects?
No, it's not part of, it will never be part of the regular operating budget. Sorry. It'll never be part of the regular operating budget of the church. This would be for projects that come, the boiler broke, the roof leaked, the parking lot has a big sinkhole in it, those types of projects that, while sometimes we were able to plan ahead, like we're going to renovate the boiler, and these are usually, we're more reactive. However, we're trying to become more, with the good staff that we have with Mark and Scott working, we're starting to become more proactive in getting things fixed before they become a capital problem. Seeing no other questions, sir, I think it's up to you.
I'm going to ask Ally a question here, so bear with me. I'm putting Ally on the spot.
I don't get to vote on these things. Whew. But I think Matt spoke to it eloquently, and also just attending the last Board of Trustees meeting. I mean, I was like, wow, these are hard meetings to be in. There are really big, critical needs of the church. You know, Scott, you talked about the financial health of this church, that it is good. And we are in a good position compared to a lot of other churches. If this vote does not come to pass, that's okay. But I think then it alludes to how would we as a church choose to fix our boiler roof, parking lot. If we're saying this is not money that we want to touch and allow the Board of Trustees to use for these critical needs, then we have to find another source of income for that. So your vote signals which way you feel on that, or if there's another pathway forward.
Thanks, Ally. She put that so eloquently that I put her on the spot. We had this conversation earlier, so I appreciate your input. Yes.
So will there be any restrictions to how low this money can get down to?
Yeah, so that speaks to Mark's point, I believe, of, I mean, we don't currently have that in the motion, or in what the trustees motioned, to have a restriction of, I believe, Mark, your opinion was do not spend more than the deficit that we have, or spend it down to the deficit that we have.
Yeah, I think if you forecast what's the potential range of the deficit we need to have that be kind of a minimum threshold as to what it might be. Because otherwise you are technically borrowing from either conceptually endowment or temporarily restricted funds that donors have given to us just to meet the cash flow operators of the church.
Yeah, go ahead, Ellie.
And I may be speaking way out of turn here, but if this was Board of Trustees funds that they have control over, and we wanted to use it for something outside the purview of the Board of Trustees, wouldn't that, and I'm just asking an open question, would that not have to go before the cabinet to be approved? They wouldn't be able to unilaterally be able to pull that out, or like the finance, coming in saying, we're going to take this money. It'd probably have to come up for a congregational vote, but I'm not sure if that's ever happened in this situation, but that's, essentially what a charge conference is, or to have a congregational vote to dramatically reroute funds that had a very specific purpose, but I could be wrong.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Yes, Mary.
I just wanted a clarification. Would these funds be moved into a separate restricted fund for building maintenance that's been outlined, or would they be moved into the general fund?
They would remain, as far as the fund, they would remain in the United Methodist Fund. I'm not sure if that answers your question, or if you're speaking towards like where they would appear on the budget. I don't anticipate there would be any change. We're not planning on changing anything other than just removing the restriction. How the funds are classified would not change. Yes, Roger. Mm-hmm.
Used for special projects. And every year, it never seems to get into the budget. So I think this would be a good opportunity maybe for putting those two together, if it could be that time.
I'm not yeah, I'm trying to paraphrase what you're asking. So are you asking us, can we vote now on the proposal as is, and then further put restrictions on it? Are you asking us to vote on whether we would put on restrictions today?
Yes. Can we vote on the restrictions today and then come up with another plan to do something to build for the future in terms of expenditures and our projects that we talked about?
Mark, were you going to address that? Were you?
I was going to simply say to amend the proposed resolution that you read, and just simply add a sentence to it and say to direct finance and board of trustees to set appropriate reserve for funds that meet the ongoing operations of the church and its capital and operating
Can you repeat that, the language there? I'm going to write it down. I don't want to to miss what you're saying. So to amend the proposal, I'm not saying we're going to do this. I am, because we still have to have a motion to amend this, but I just want to get your point, Mark.
To remove the restriction on the use of the funds, similar to the proposal that Alan had read, but to add a sentence that directs the Board of Trustees and the Finance Committee to establish a sufficient reserve consistent with the goals of meeting the operating and capital needs of the church.
So, hold on. I don't take shorthand, so. So the current reserve is 100,000. That I think that's fair statement. Restriction. So, can you clarify the difference between a restriction and a reserve for me? Or is there one?
A restriction is, it can only be used for a designated purpose. A reserve is broad enough to cover all purposes, anticipated or unanticipated.
Do we have other discussion on this, Claudia? Right.
It's not for the budget of the church. The 198,000 is not to be used for the budget of the church. It's to be used for either a parsonage or other big expenses like the boiler or something like that.
Right. Dave, you had your hand up, and then I'll.
So, at the end of the day, it is the church's money. However, it is currently reserved for capital purposes, and there's a firewall between operations and capital for a reason. The ask was to remove the restriction that it be saved for a new parsonage. There is wisdom in putting a reserve level on that, but I don't think crossing the streams between capital and operations. Board of Trustees doesn't deal with operations. So that would be a major crossover. At the end of the day, the church can do whatever it chooses to do. But that would be a little bit more major than what we were asking.
Thanks. Mark, does your point go directly to Dave's point?
Yeah, there's already in operation that practical crossover occurring because as you run a general fund deficit and we paid those bills, the source of that payment is coming from general church assets. Now, because cash is fungible, whether or not you're saying we're actually taking from somebody's mission contribution to make that temporary payment, or we're taking it from borrowing from the Board of Trustees, general unrestricted assets, to church assets. You know, cash is fungible, it's still happening.
Okay.
You know, we just don't want to, I don't want to put us in a spot to say, we don't have enough general church assets that we're borrowing from monies that somebody gave to missions or gave for a specific purpose. You know, we've got enough to cover that deficit activity.
Okay, I got your point. Thanks, Mark.
Also, and I'm new at this, but I haven't been involved in any of these discussions. But my concern is that fund should never be spent down below a certain level. I don't, and be held only
Well, and currently that's what we have. It has a level, it can never be spent down under 100,000 unless we vote today to remove that restriction. So I'm going to say this, I would not feel it responsible for us to really amend what the trustees have put together today, unless we have members of the trustees here who feel it would be. I think you need to vote your heart, vote what you feel on the resolution, because I think we have too many different ideas floating around. So, Lee, why don't you?
I can't just sit there. Okay. First of all, yes, we have a deficit. We can't operate at a deficit. We have to do something. We either have additional fundraising, which we've done in the past. So, setting aside monies to make sure that we cover the deficit. No, that's not a concern of mine, because we do manage, our money prudently, I would say. And all the money that comes in, excluding, the funds for the parsonage, are just merged together. I say we've got the bills to, or the money to pay the bills. We do, because we've got all these people who prepay. Well, technically, they paid for the whole year. Should we be using them for, expenses currently? And all the mission funds, they're all pooled together, so we don't have little pockets of money sitting here and there in different little accounts. It's put together. So we've got the cash available. But by the year end, we have to make sure that we don't have that deficit, so that we aren't borrowing from these funds that are restricted. So all we're asking today is, we had this parsonage money, just remove that restriction, because we're not going to buy a new parsonage. So take that away, and then trustees, on their, within their authority, can say, let's put some restrictions on that. We know that we never have to drop below, we don't want to drop below a certain level. They can do that. And if you trust, that the job that they're doing, as they have for all these years, then we can go forward that. It just gives them that flexibility to use those funds as they see fit. And they should make the restrictions about what types of things it can be used for, because we had a discussion at the end of last year. Well, was this repair a capital improvement, or should that have gone to the general operating budget? It's that back and forth. So they're going to have to establish those restrictions of saying, hey, if it's below a certain level, no, that's not going to be what this will be used for. That should either be capital improvement or go back to the general operating. But like I said, it just gives them that flexibility, and we're not really doing anything differently than we always have, with these funds. So, Martha.
Is the current situation that the $100,000 restriction is to be used only for a port parsonage?
Right.
And so if that, we could just be moving the parsonage earmark?
Right. That's all they're asking to do, is to remove that restriction, because we don't need to save $100,000 for a future parsonage, because we're paying through the general operating budget the funds to set aside. We pay the pastors for their housing allowance. So it's a simple resolution from that standpoint. Marcy. Oh, she's got to have something to say too.
Couple of points. All the money's not just merged together in a fund buried in my backyard. I keep meticulous records. I know I can tell you exactly every fund to the penny,
Right.
what has been reserved and where it goes. And when people ask me, is there any extra money, I can tell you what's restricted and what is not. Point of clarification.
But we don't have separate accounts in the bank for that.
No, we have one major account, which is at PNC, and that makes it easy to write a check and to charge it to different accounts and do that kind of thing. Just wanted to make that point. Been doing this since 1995. So the second is, concerning deficit, and I know we get wrapped up in this, and yes, it's kind of like if you have a bill due and you don't want to, put it on your credit card, you could take from maybe the savings account that you know you're going to pay your insurance bill the next month because you know that money's going to come in. We're just kind of moving that around. Yes, it technically goes against some restricted funds. But this year, many people, more than usual, prepaid. So at this point, we always look at the deficit and we look at what's still in prepays to be transferred 1 month at a time. We do that to create to create an accurate financial picture. The reserve fund and what's been prepaid is about $50,000, I think, right now. It's the highest I've ever seen it at the end of June. So if we have a $5,000 deficit, we have $45,000 to $50,000 that we're borrowing from, netting against. When this comes into consideration, as Lee and I always start to sweat about October or November, and your point is if you make your annual donation in November, please try to do that in July or August. We sleep so much better. But that kind of thing. So that money is there. Yes, at the end of the year, if people have not donated as much as pledged, or we've had ridiculously expensive things happen, then that's when we have a conversation. The third is we have a really good Board of Trustees, Cabinet, and Finance, and they work heavily together. So you can remove the restriction and trust that whatever other decisions need to be made for this church will be made by that group. It's not one person or one group. It's going to be made as a joint decision. So.
Just a trustee?
I think that's a hymn, trust the trustees, because there's no other way. Scott. Yeah, so Scott is asking, does the motion need to be, or are you saying that? The motion to amend. Is there a motion to amend on the floor? Mark, motions? No.
I motion to approve the first motion that you read.
Wow, all right, so people are getting hungry, and we'd like to, do we have a second? Okay, so thank you very much for your discussion. It tells me that you all care so much about our church. So we are going to once again take a vote, and while the votes are tallied, pastor's report. Yes, I apologize, I should have done that. Yes. All right. The motion is that the congregation approved to remove parsonage-only restriction on trustee funds set aside after the sale of a parsonage in 2003. The change will permit the Board of Trustees to use these funds for critical needs and emergencies involving our building and its properties.
Thank you. This morning I asked to look at the meeting agenda. I knew I was doing a prayer, and then they said, oh, you're also doing the pastor's report. So this pastor's report will be as long as it takes to read, to count the ballots. So, but first I do want to speak to the thoughtfulness that I've just witnessed. Conversation, words, kindness, different points of view, all within this sacred space. And again, I do appreciate the wisdom that's brought forth and just the care that you're all taking in the business matters of this church. I wouldn't be honest if I said that I'm just a great businesswoman. That's not my forte. So oftentimes I sit through, a Board of Trustees meeting or a cabinet meeting, and I'm in awe at the gifts that people bring to the table to really make this work. My area is loving on people and pastoring. But in order to do that effectively, we have to have a facility. We have to have a staff. We have to have all the things that make the church run. So I do certainly appreciate everyone that works on a committee and also brings their expertise and wisdom to play. But I want to talk a little bit while they're counting the ballots, just about the transition. And I want to congratulate us on a retirement well done. So let's give ourselves a little round of applause. Ta-ta-ta-ta. Yes, thank you. I know somebody was like, wow, do you do this for all your pastors? Well, only ones that are retiring after 39 years. So Pastor Rick was with us, Pastor Rick and Natalie were with us for 9 years. And as, you know, like Lee and I were talking, it was a fabulous celebration. From the worship to the gifts to the fun that we had downstairs. We never really got to have that renovation celebration that we were hoping for, where we'd all kind of come together with food and celebration in the building. And it kind of felt like we were able to accomplish that along with doing a retirement celebration for Pastor Rick. So I think we've done a great job with those things. And I'm very grateful to the endowment committee for accepting the proposed grant and then granting the grant, I guess, so that we have money to make sure that this transition is smooth through the retirement of Pastor Rick, onboarding to Pastor Dylan, taking care of some of those expenses that hopefully only come along. What, David was king for 40 years? Every 40 years or so. So we hope that Dylan will be with us for a good long time. And so it's important to make some investments in this transition of people as well. And then there'll also be some funding that helps the staff and some training. It's good to know what the communication style of your leader is. And it will be helpful for him to know our work styles, our leadership styles, and our communication styles. So we're going to be doing a little internal work so that we can keep the church going and healthy. So again, I think you hear it reiterated time and time again. We have such a wonderful staff here. Again, patting the back. But I agree with what you were saying today, Scott. I feel like there's a lot of pieces that have been put into place, and I feel a divine presence of people and situations coming together that are going to lead us forward. So, and for the first time, probably in a long time, almost all the staff has children. So we'll probably be, delegating sick days amongst ourselves with our children. But I think that brings a whole new experience and a whole new outlook for the church when you have parents working together. And certainly not everyone on staff has children, but I do think that we will see growth with children and youth with this new pastor. So how are those ballots coming there, ladies? Okay, wonderful. Marcy's got it. So again, I feel excited for the future. We talked about how great leadership, we talked about great staff, but we have a great congregation. We have a wonderful, loving congregation, and I am so excited to welcome Pastor Dylan. And I'm also excited to hear what the results of this vote are. And so I turn it over to Tom, and I thank you.
I've decided to wait till next week to release the results. Just kidding, just kidding. We have the results. We have 47 votes for yes and 2 votes for no. So the resolution passes. Yes. And thank you to the trustees and to Matt for speaking to that today. And thank you again. And thank you for your grace, because this is not my area of expertise, even though I'm your leader. So thank you very much. At this point, I will ask Scott Hardy to come up and close us with a benediction.
Thank you. Ellie, it's good to see Lee's humility is wearing off on you. And also thank you guys you guys are truly, I've worked at a few different churches, and you guys are a great congregation. And just the health of this church is pretty awe-inspiring from other churches that I've worked at. But yeah, thank you for all of your hard work. And so at this time, I send you forth, not doing our plans, but by doing God's plans, and that we may meet again next year with more amazing stories of what God has done through us and through this church and through the funds and the giving and the offerings. And I just ask for God's blessing among you upon us as we go and do his work, that we would come back with dirty hands and full hearts from doing his work. Amen.
Meeting adjourned. Go fill your stomachs.